basics of animation. Now, this is going to be focused on using After Effects. Before you jump into After Effects, you really need to have looked at other forms of animation first. So things like simple GIFs in Photoshop, or doing stop motion by hand, or doing little flipbook stop motions. So After Effects should really be the last sort of journey on your animation learning journey or whatever. There are other Adobe softwares, so Adobe Premiere, Adobe Animate, that are similar to After Effects, but from a graphic design point of view and for sort of the bare bones of what is achievable in A-level graphics, After Effects works really nicely for us. Adobe Animate is maybe more simple in some senses, but it also allows you to do more character-based animation, but that's something that takes a lot longer, so I wouldn't recommend doing character animation. Really what we're going to be looking at is text and image, which can be used to make a really wide variety of successful animations. If you look at animated infographics or animated infomercials, you'll see the kind of thing on YouTube that uses text and image really effectively to create nice little designs. Things like character animation require a lot harder work and a lot sort of more sophisticated character rigging, full walk scenes, and you don't really get the full outcome of it because you're spending so long with the nitty-gritty stuff. So what we're going to do today is text and image. Now, the thing with After Effects is you don't tend to make things in After Effects. You make them separately in Photoshop or Illustrator, and then you animate them in After Effects. That's a real key thing there. Now, you could do stop motion, and I'm going to touch on that in another video. You could do little drawings or illustrations or whatever and load those in. What I'm going to be working with is icons, so I've got all of this ready prepared, so you can see I've got a folder called Animation Assets. It's really important that all of these things are together, because if at any point you lose a file or you move something, After Effects freaks out. So you can see I've got my folder, I've called it Animation Assets, I've got my background that I want to use, so you can see I've put this sort of like paper style background in there. I've got all of my little icons. Now, you could make these by hand, you can make them in Illustrator, it could be more complex illustrations. These are obviously just little line drawings. You could do something more in-depth, colour, shadow, etc. So you could do figures and stuff. But I think for this it works really nicely with icons. And then I've also got a script. Now, obviously, before you start animating, you really want to storyboard it out. So you want to figure out what you've got, you want to plan the process. What do you want to talk about? What do you want to be on there? Are you going to put text on there, or are you going to talk over it? If you're going to do a voiceover, you can get away with less text. Obviously, for this, we're not going to do a voiceover, so I've used a lot more text than I would maybe recommend, actually. And then figure out, okay, well, for each piece of text, what kind of image is going to go with it? So it's a little bit when you do an infographic, and you're thinking about what's going to be on there, what kind of imagery can go with it. And it's the same sort of process. You want to storyboard this out so that you can figure out the process, the timings, how is it going to play out, what's going to happen first, etc. So you can see I've sort of broken mine into scenes. So I've got my title scene, and then I've got scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, etc. And then what I've done is I've got an image for each scene. So I've got a title, a piece of text, and an icon, and then I've labelled them to go with the scenes. So it keeps it nice and simple, and it keeps it nice and easy for me. This will be on Teams if you wanted to have a go with this stuff, so you can have a go with actually my things that you can work with. Now, this is a document that's already set up, and I'm going to show you how to set up a document. But you can see here I've got sort of I've got my window, which has got my sort of project in. So this has got my work in. I can do fit, so I can get that on screen. This is your time here, and this is called a scrub. So this blue thing, as I go across, you can scrub across the time, and you can see what happens at each point. So you can see I've got things appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing. So we're going through the scenes. And you can see I've got main text, lower text, image. I've also put on my script a reminder of I've figured out my fonts already. So I've decided what fonts I want to use for these. I've sort of figured out the size, the contrast that I want to use. All of this stuff should be done in advance. So you should really have a very clear vision before you get to After Effects. After Effects is only for putting that stuff together. You don't want to be trying to figure things out in After Effects because it just gets very complicated. So you need to have a very clear, this is what it's going to look like, this is what my background is going to be like, this is the imagery I'm going to have at that point, and that's the text that's going to go with it, this is what it's going to do, and then you just make it happen in After Effects. So you don't really want to be, adding any random extra stuff. So this is your After Effects screen. So this is your main sort of window. Your toolbar is along the top, whereas in sort of Photoshop and Illustrator it's down the side. This is our sort of imports or resources sort of project panel here, and then this is our layers and our timeline. So these give you the layers of all the different things, and then the timeline shows you when that layer is going to be on screen. So you can see my history of graphic design layer comes on screen now as it goes red, and then it goes off when that red disappears. And you can see my next layer is then that one. My background layer is all the way along the composition, so I want the background on there all the time. If I hide that, you can see I've just got a plain white background. So you can see that that's on there all the time. I've locked it using my little padlock here so that it doesn't shift. And you can see how that process works. So something else comes on, and I've got my layers nice and organised. So the very bottom one is the first thing that shows, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, and it goes upwards like that. You need to keep your layers organised. You want things next to each other. You can see because I want these to go at the same time, I've got them next to each other so I can make sure that they all disappear at exactly the same time, rather than one being like that and then it randomly sort of staying on and looking really awkward. So make sure your layers are really organised, make sure you know where things are. You know, if things aren't named, if you've got loads of sort of imagery and shapes and stuff that you've brought in that's got random names, you're really going to struggle. So you can see I've got clear names, 1, 2, 3, I've got my text, nice and easy. My text I've just typed in. You could make typography designs in Illustrator or in Photoshop or by hand and scan those in or work with those as JPEGs or PNGs or whatever, but I've just found it quite easy just to use the text tool in here. You can add shapes and objects, so you can see we've got some shape tools. So if I wanted a shape to go behind that, I could do that, and I can change the colour of it and things like that, so I could put a shape in the background, and you can see I've got that there. But things like that get a little bit more complicated, so I would advise maybe just using the text tool, maybe using the pen tool if needs be, and then you really just want your selection tool here, which is just that one there. Other than that, you don't really need to use any of this other stuff. If you wanted to rotate something, so you can see I've got this, if I wanted that on its side, all I can do is sort of move it and it goes a bit weird. So obviously when I want to scale things, I want to hold shift so that it scales as it should. I've got all my other stuff down here, so I've got my little character panel, which is basically your text panel. So that tells me the font, it tells me whether it's light, medium, italic, etc. I can change the colour, so I can make it red if I wanted to. Again, you know, have a consistent colour scheme, keep it nice and simple. I've got my text size. Now you'll see you get this little sort of arrow, which means you can go sort of from big to small. Now what's happening there is you can see the text gets further apart. Now that's because of this setting here, and then that changes the line. Now obviously I've got this sort of paper style background, so I'm trying to make sure that all of my text sits on these lines, so it just feels a little bit more realistic, it feels a little bit more natural, and I'm just lining things up. Obviously this is right aligned, or left aligned, because it's to the left side of my page. Again, that's in your paragraph settings, so you can centre align, right align, left align, etc. So all of that stuff is in those two pieces there. The other key one that you're going to sort of want to know is your preview, so I tend to bring this one up to the top. Now this is your place, so if I want to press spacebar, it will play from wherever my scrubber is. So if I put the scrub to the left and press space, then you can see it plays and it goes through. If I press space again, it will pause, and then when I press space again, it will continue on from where that blue scrub has gone to. You can see that the time code is passing on here, so our little time bar there. Now I find that really useful just to go through and check the time and check, okay, well that's bang on 5, and then that's 5 and a bit, that's bang on 6, and then I could just make sure that I'm figuring out how long things are taking. Obviously I've got a lot of text on here, so I'm having to play and time it and check that I can read it in that amount of time. So for this I might need to make it a little bit longer. And that is the basics of it really. Now I'll show you how to set up a document. So I'm going to go to File, New and New Project. When you first open After Effects for the first time, it will give you this window and it will ask you to set up a new project. So your new project is set up, and then I would set up a new composition. So the composition is actually the video itself. So the project is almost like the folder. Composition is the real thing. I'm going to name it History of Graphics. And then you've got your preset here. So this tells me how big the screen's going to be, the quality of the video, you know, the sort of ratio of my screen size or my video size, and then the frames per second. So frames per second basically means how smoothly it's going to run. So if you were doing something like a stop motion and you had 4 frames per second, that would be very slow, very jittery. You'd be able to see the movement and it'd feel very unnatural. 25 frames per second is always a good one for video. I think if you're doing sort of stop motion animation and you want it to feel very smooth and realistic, again, 25 frames per second is a good one. So we've got HD TV, 1080, 25, and that's the preset we're going to go for. We're going to leave our aspect ratio, we're going to leave everything else. Now all you want to do down here is set your duration. So that tells me how long the video is going to be. I tend to set it to 30 seconds, but for something like this, because I've got quite a lot of stuff going on, you could go as far as a minute or 3 minutes, and you could just put that in there. So I'm actually going to set it for 3 minutes, because that's probably how long the video would be. Your background colour generally is black. I've set mine to white, because I know I wanted my text black, and then I obviously decided that I wanted to put that background on there. So you can see that gives us this new composition. Now at the moment, there's nothing in this panel here, so to add things, I need to drag things into this panel. So you can either go and find your assets folder, choose something and drag it in, which is fine, or you can go to File, Import, File, and then again, I could find my folder and I could select all of these and import them in. So you can see it adds them all in there. Now because I've labelled them clearly, that's nice and easy for me to see, and I can sort of see what's going on. Now you see I've clicked one of those, it's opened it in this separate little tab up here. So you can see this little purple tab has just opened that image for me. I want to always stay in this composition tab, and you can lock that so you can sort of stay in there. Now when I go through here, I want the one that says background, and I'm going to drag that into my sort of layers panel here. Now I've got my background there. You can see your tools, so I'm just going to hold shift so that I can scale it without stretching it, and then I'm going to lock it. That's all I want to do. Obviously if I wanted this background to sort of appear in or fade in or something, we can get onto that later, but this is just the basics. Now you can see it's given me this box here, so if I sort of make that bigger or smaller, you'll be able to see that it is this sort of section. So this tells me when it's going to come on screen and how long for. So obviously with the background, I want that on the entire time of the video. So I want it on for the whole thing. So that's my background layer. Now, because I want text on here, I'm going to go to a text tool. I'm going to draw myself a text box. I'm going to go to my script and I'm going to find the text I want and I'm going to paste that in. Now, obviously it's not how I want it because it's not the right size. So I'm going to fix my sizes and put that to maybe 150. And I'm just going to spread it out a little bit because it looks a bit like that. Now, if I wanted to move this, I have to go back to my move tool. So it's always really important that you just know what your tools are, how to get to them, etc. So now that I've got it where I want it, I'm just going to go back and adjust that so that that goes on the second line. So I think it looks a bit cramped if it's up there. And I think I've got room to make the text a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go 160 and then bring that back like that. Okay, so back to my normal tool. Again, obviously at this point you might change the font, you might change the colour, you know, etc. So I'm just going to get that where I want it. Now I don't want this to come on straight away, so I'm just going to give myself sort of, 1 second. So I'm going to drag that little red thing to 1 second, and then if I play, you can see that it has a second and then it appears. Again, I don't want it on for the entirety of the video, so I'm just going to make it last till maybe sort of like a few seconds in. So let's go to 10 seconds, or let's say 8, maybe a little bit more realistic. Now obviously this is very small, so if you wanted to zoom in, you can see these sort of like mountain icons here. You could go about halfway and then you can see it lets you pan. Now 3 minutes is quite a long video, so you might want to sort of just zoom in a little bit so you can see what you're doing. And you can see I've not got that bang on. Now that we've zoomed in, it's not exactly where I want it to be. Obviously you can type in here, so if you wanted to go to directly to a certain frame, and then you could line that up like that. And we can see when I press spacebar that now sort of plays through. So that's quite a long period of time actually. So I might bring that down. I might go down to 6 seconds, so it just has 5 seconds on screen. Obviously I want my next piece of text in, so I'm going to go back to my text tool, draw myself another text box, and I'm going to find my other piece of text. Obviously if you've got something else going on, you might have a shape or a line coming in. You could do that. Obviously you can see this has come in the same sort of font, so I want to go to my other font. Now this is why it's really useful to have already figured out exactly what you want the fonts to be like, what kind of sizes you want them to be, and just really getting your head around how you want this thing to look. Set that to 60. Now obviously you can see that my text box was way too small. So now I can get that sorted out a bit better. Now it is just a bit fiddly sometimes, just remembering to go back to your other tool, remembering to sort of get it all figured out. I'm going to make sure it's all in the same font, how I want it. I think 60 is maybe a little bit small, let's go 72. And again, I want to get it so that it looks as though it's sort of spread across those lines. Like that. So that's my first chunk of the thing really. Now obviously you can see it's given me this other block here on my layers. So again, I want to figure out when that comes in and when it disappears. So I'm going to go all the way to the end, grab the end of it, scooch it all the way this way, and then I think I want it to come in just after the main title. So let's go from 1 second. Now, because we did 25 frames a second, you'll see it goes 1 second, 19, 20, and then it goes to the next second. So that's because it's getting to 25 and then it's the next frame. So I might give it a whole second there and we'll see how that looks. So happy with that, nice and easy. Now, what I might do for my next thing is then just copy and paste these because I'm quite happy with how they look. So I'm just going to do Command C, Command V. I'm going to move it up my layers panel to keep things nice and organised. I'm going to figure out how big of a gap I want. So I think we'll just do ½ a second, which works out at like 12. So let's go to there, and then I'm going to find this, and I'm going to change this to my next piece of text. So copying and pasting can just make your life a little bit easier once you've got something figured out how you want it, especially when you're working with lots of text. You can see I've got my text in there. I might make that a little bit bigger maybe, we'll see. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other piece of text. Copy and paste, drag it up in my layers panel, shift it to where I want it. So again, I'm just going to give it maybe until 7 seconds, get that to appear. Now these are going to want to be much longer because I've got a big piece of text. So I'm going to go quite far and see how long it takes me to sort of read it once I've typed that new bit of text in. So I'm going to go to my next bit of text. Now this is why it's really key to have everything nice and organised in advance because it can be a very long-winded process if not. So there we go. So I've typed that in. And I'm going to put that where I want it. And again, I want to make sure it fits along these lines, which looks good around there. So if I go back to there, and then I'm going to figure out how long it takes for me to read it. Okay, so that feels about good actually. So now obviously I've got an image to go with this, so I need to find my image. So my image is number 1, so this is scene number 1. And again, I'm going to drag that into my layers panel. And then I want to move it up to where this sort of stuff is. Now obviously it's very big at the moment, so again I'm just going to hold shift and scale it down. Now my composition here maybe is a little bit boring. I could have maybe been a bit more inventive, so I could obviously put that there, I could make it bigger. I could move all of this to the other side and put that there. So it's really up to you how you organise the objects on the page. I think that's quite a nice way of having, you know, multiple objects, and then you can really think about actually where they go and how you want things to look. So I might do that. So pretty much happy with that. So that is how I want that to look. Now again, you can see my image has gone all the way across, and I don't want it all the way across. I want it to sort of appear just after the text does. And then I want it to disappear at the same time as everything else. So I'm going to drag that in and get it to go at the same time. There we go. So they disappear together. So that is the process you want to go through really. You can see the one that I had open originally. If I can get that one open for you. So this is the one I had originally. Now obviously I've got a lot more layers in here, so you can see it starts to get quite complicated. Because I'm going with a very sort of thorough system, and it's 3 things per page and 3 things per thing, it's nice and easy and nice and organised. A couple of things you can look at up here are sort of these things here. So we've got frame blending and motion blur. So if you've got lots of things happening and you want it to feel a little bit more sort of clean and crisp, you can see you've got these little tick boxes. So I could tick motion blur for some of these things. I could untick that. I could also think about other things like that, but you really just, your motion blur is probably the only one you really want to think about for now. A couple of other things you can do is you can change the colour of these things. So if I go through to one of my pieces, obviously that's an image technically because I've exported it as a PNG. So you've got things up here like effect, colour here, and then we've got our hue saturation. So very similar to how we do that in Photoshop. I can tick colorize. Now obviously it's really important that you've got the layer selected that you want to do. And then what I've got here is I've got my saturation and my lightness. So if I put my lightness up, and then you can see I've got my saturation, and then you can see I can change actually the hue. There we go. So if I go down to this here, you can see I've got a thing that says effects, and I've got hue saturation. So if I just reset that first one. Now, I could have that there, and I could click that little thing. So you can see there that gives us what we call a keyframe. So it's a little stopwatch and gives us a keyframe. So that's that little diamond on here. And can you see it's put it where the scrub is? So I could select those and move them. You can see they move together. But wherever your scrub is where that keyframe will go. And now keyframes are the next important thing. So what I could then do is I could tick colorize, and I could say at that point I want it to be black, but by this point I want it to have gone up in lightness, so you can see it adds another keyframe, up in saturation, and I want the hue to be totally different. And by that point I want it to have gone back to black. So my lightness was something like 25, that was on 0, and that was on 0 as well. There you go. Now if I play that now, you can see our text comes on, and then our image will start to change colour. Now obviously that's a little bit slow, so you might want to think about how effective that is and what you want to do with it. But that's quite a nice, interesting thing for you to do. Obviously you could do that with photographs and things like that, or anything like that, but that's quite a nice one. But really the important thing is knowing where these keyframes are and seeing how they work, and understanding that they go at certain points and that they work together. Another thing to do with keyframes is then thinking about transitions. So this is the really important part about After Effects. So at the moment our text just appears and then it will disappear again. Now that's not very effective. So easy way to do this is opacity. So if I go to this layer and I click the little arrow and I go to my transform, you can see I've got several things. So I could say at this point I want it to be 0% opacity, and I'm going to keyframe that. Within the next few seconds I want it to be at 100% opacity. Now if I play that it will be very quick, but you can see it fades on. So I might just drag that out a little bit, play again, and it fades on. Now a fade on is really nice, so that always works really lovely. You could do the exact same thing at the end and say, okay, by that point I want it to be at 0%. Now if I don't put another keyframe in, it will guess between those 2 points. You can see it starts to fade it out in between. So what this does is it generates the gap between the key points. So if I've got 100% there and I've got 0% there, you can see down here that it's already calculating that. So what I need to do is say, well, I want you to stay at 100% all the way up until that point. So between those 2 points, it's still 100%, and then it's going to fade out again. Now you can copy and paste keyframes, so I could copy and paste that, close this one, go to opacity, and paste those in there. And then it'll do the exact same thing. Now obviously I'm not quite in the right place there, so I would need to move those according to where the scrub is. And then if we play it, hopefully they will disappear at the same time. So the key thing is using this scrub to line up where you think your thing should be. And you can have several of these open at the same time and check that they're in line. And I'm not quite in line, but it's not far off. So there, what we've got happening now is it fades on, and then they both fade out together. Now I've obviously not added the fade on to this one, so I could add the same fade on to this one. I could do something else with this one. So instead of saying I want you to fade on, I could say by this point I want you to be in that position on the screen. But earlier on, so if I just shift that and give us some space, and I'm going to stretch this, I want you to be over here. And can you see it draws a line between the 2 points? So it goes, okay, I want to go from that point to that point. So if I play that now, it's going to zoom on the screen like that. So you could do from above, so I could change the position. So you can see we've got sideways and we've got, so I could delete that keyframe and go back to there. And instead I could have it come up from here. So that it drops in. There we go. So that's sort of a move on keyframe. We've got a fade on and a fade out keyframe. Obviously you can have it move out again. Now the thing with the moving keyframes, so if I just let that play through, is that it just stops. So it doesn't feel like a very natural movement. It all starts at the same speed and it just sort of stops without coming to a natural stop. Obviously naturally if you set off your car, it doesn't start at 60 miles an hour. It starts at 10 miles an hour and then works its way up. And then when you stop, it doesn't go from 60 miles an hour to 0 miles an hour. It goes down to 40, to 30, to 10, etc. So really these should do the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight my keyframes here. I'm going to right click, go to Keyframe Assistant, and then we want Easy Ease. Now this is your absolute best friend in After Effects. Easy Ease changes the shape of those keyframes. Now what happens now, and this is very, very subtle, but it slows down a little bit before it gets to the end. So I'll just spread that out so you can see it. So instead of just dropping and stopping, you can see it comes in fast and then it just slows down that little bit. I'll just drag that out a bit more so you can see it better. And it comes to a more natural stop. So it just eases in and eases out. So I would always recommend using Easy Ease on every single keyframe. So whenever you do a set of keyframes, select them all, right click, Easy Ease, and it is just the best way to do things. So you should never really have diamond keyframes. You should always have these little hourglass keyframes, just because Easy Ease really smooths everything out and makes it feel a lot more natural. So we've got a zoom in, a drop in, fade out together. And then what you really want to do is figure out, well, okay, well, what else can I do? So we've got opacity. So we've got a fade in. So we could log the opacity of this one at 100% there. We could say we want it to be 0% there. We could also say that we want it to be at that rotation there. And then it's going to spin round all the way and land back where it should. So if I show you that now, it's going to fade in, but it's also going to spin in. So that's a very sort of like typical newspaper ad thing that you got in old films. So we've got a spin in there. Obviously you could see it's got sort of 1 there, so we could do 10 spins, so it's going to spin in much faster, like that, which is obviously horrible. So we could have a spin in and a fade in put together. You could have, so if I take this piece of text for example, so again I'm going to close this one up. Now it's really important just to keep your layers nice and clean, so only really have open the layer that you need open. I could make it get bigger, so I could say, okay, well at this point I want you to be that size, but at this point I want you to be much smaller, and you can see it gets smaller and it sort of disappears. I could also do opacity, so I could say at this point I want you to be 100% opacity, but at this point I want you to be 0% opacity. And then when I play that, you can see that it fades in and gets bigger. If I go to the image layer, I could try something else. So I could go to, we've done position, we've done scale, we've done rotation, we've done opacity. We could then start to think about some different effects. So I could add what we call a preset to this. So you can see I've got my hue saturation that's happening on there. So it's going to change colours. But if I go to here, and I go to effects and presets, and then we've got this one at the top that says animation presets. We've got some image, different ones. So I can go to image, or I could go to transitions or transform, and you can see there's some different things. If I do transitions movements, and I double click that, or I go to slide straight, now you can see it does it for me. Now I might not want that, so I might want to undo that. So you really just have to, if we do stretch and blur, and see what that does. Obviously horrible. But what you can do with these is I could then go and I could get that, so I can see the stretch and I can see the blur, so I can change when I want them to happen. So I can go into these and I can say, well, I want it to be much slower than that, or much quicker than that. So I can go, okay, well, you're going to stretch in much quicker. Now obviously I'm just going to undo those because I don't like that effect. So some of those are your sort of transitions. We could do a zigzag wipe, see what that looks like, which is quite interesting. So it sort of zigzag wipes the image on, which isn't great because it doesn't do the whole thing. But you know, really it's just playing it by ear and seeing what happens. You can do these with text. So if I go up to my next sort of layer, so that changes colour and then they all disappear. Obviously they all sort of disappear, so what I would want to do then is go and do my transform opacity and set it to 0, set it to 100, copy and paste those, and then to get them in the same place I can just go down to the next layer, transform, paste, click opacity and then it drops in, and then my next layer. So really all of this is about timing and just being very sort of on it with this and making sure that they all work nicely together. And then if I close all of that and we can see whether it's done it, and they all fade out together nicely. So for this one, say this text, I can go to my animation presets at the top. In this effects and presets panel, I can go to text, and there's loads of stuff. So if I want it to animate in, so you can see I've got animate in, animate out, etc. I could do one of these horrible center spiral things. So I'll play that. And again, you can see that's the worst thing ever. So some of these are incredibly cringy, but you can find interesting things. You can see I've got my spiral and I've got my fade ins. So again, I could find these and I can make it much quicker. And speed it up and then play it again. So that happens a lot quicker. Again, I'm going to remove that because I don't like it. Some of these are quite interesting. If I play that one, so it sort of like types it in like that. You can get typewriter ones. You can have fly-in ones. You can have raining characters in. So that's quite interesting. So they sort of all gradually appear. So there's loads and loads of interesting presets. So you can go through those and just see how they work. And just explore it really. The first ones obviously to try are the transform settings. So just getting used to actually, okay, what is a keyframe? How does it work? Where does it go? What does it do? You know, again, these should all be easy ease. So right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. And you just want to make sure things are nice and smooth and simple, that they all happen at the same time, and that it feels very natural. Obviously, the more organised your layers are, the easier that will be. But that is the basics of it really. So setting up a composition, getting it how we want it, starting to bring our assets in. So I'm just going to close that effects panel so I can see my little assets here. Starting to use those and dropping them into here. Starting to think about your timing. Now obviously I've got an issue here, so if I go back to my script, I've only got to part 3. Now I've got 10 scenes to do effectively. So I'm not going to fit that on because you can see at 30 seconds I've got to the end of my composition. So if I'm concerned about that, I could go up to composition at the top, I could go to composition settings, and then I could push that further, so I could put my 3 minutes in there. So if you set your composition up and you think, oh, this will only be a 1 minute video, and then actually you're finding things are taking longer, or you want things to be slower, or you want more things to happen, obviously the more effects that you have in, the slower you're going to have to make it, because things are going to take time to load and it's going to take the viewer's attention away. So you might need more time for that reason. If you want to change your background colour, you can do that here as well. When I click OK, you can see I've now got loads more space to play with, and I can really look at that. Obviously I'm very zoomed in, so I can sort of zoom out and see the whole scale of things, and then I've got my whole video on there. But really it's just playing around. I find this easiest because you can use text and image, stuff that you've already made, and you can just think about, okay, well, how does that appear on screen? What do I want it to do when it shows up? You know, how do I want it to fade out? What kind of gaps or timing do I want to do? Obviously you could do a voiceover, you could do some music in the background, but really just the basics is understanding keyframes, understanding the layout of After Effects, understanding how you use different transformations, how you edit these little bars, how you use your scrub, and thinking about, you know, keyframe assistant, easy ease, etc. So give it a go, have a play around, and see what you can make.